The sound of Derek's laughter still echoes in my ears, even now, months later. Not the warm, shared laughter of friends, but that cruel, mocking sound that cuts through you like broken glass. He stood there in the parking lot of Rosewood Country Club, his arm draped possessively around his new girlfriend, the one he'd left me for, pointing at my 1998 Honda Civic with its rust spots and duct-taped bumper. "Is that seriously your car, Emma?" he'd said, loud enough for everyone arriving at the charity gala to hear. "God, I dodged a bullet with you. No wonder you could never fit into my world." The small crowd that had gathered chuckled politely, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely concealed amusement. I stood there, my cheeks burning, keys clutched in my trembling hand, wishing the asphalt would open up and swallow me whole. What none of them knew, what even I had only discovered 3 days earlier, was that in exactly 30 seconds, everything would change. The delivery truck was already turning the corner, carrying a secret that would shatter every assumption they'd ever made about me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever been looked down on, dismissed, or made to feel like you'll never be good enough, this story is for you. Because sometimes the universe has a way of revealing truths at exactly the right moment. Stay with me. I promise what happens next will be worth it. My name isn't important, but my story is. At 23, I was what you'd call invisible in all the wrong ways. Not the mysterious, intriguing kind of invisible, more like the forgettable, dismissible kind. I worked as a junior graphic designer at Preston & Associates, a mid-tier marketing firm where I spent most of my days adjusting fonts and being told my ideas were almost there but not quite right by my supervisor, Janet, who had a gift for making criticism feel like a personal attack. Derek and I had met at a coffee shop 2 years earlier. He was everything I thought I wanted, confident, successful, from a wealthy family that owned several restaurants in the city. His parents lived in a mansion in Rosewood Heights, the kind with a circular driveway and a fountain that never stopped running. When he asked me out, I couldn't believe someone like him would be interested in someone like me. For 18 months, I tried to be what he wanted. I saved for weeks to buy one designer dress so I wouldn't embarrass him at his company events. I learned about wine, even though I couldn't afford to buy any. I smiled politely when his mother, Victoria Morrison, would make subtle comments about my quaint apartment or my interesting career choice. "Graphic design," she'd say, the words dripping with condescension. "How creative." The breaking point came 6 months ago at his family's annual New Year's party. I'd spent my entire Christmas. Bonus on a dress from the clearance rack at Nordstrom, still more than I could afford, but I wanted so desperately to fit in. When I arrived, Derek took one look at me and his face fell. "That's what you're wearing?" he'd said. Later that night, I found him in his father's study with Melissa Hartley, daughter of his father's business partner. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my car, and the way they were laughing together, the way his hand rested on her lower back, I knew it was over before he even said the words. "It's not you, it's me," he'd said the next day, the cliché rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "I just think we're in different places in life. You deserve someone who can appreciate your simplicity." Simplicity. That's what he called it. What he meant was poverty. The months that followed were a blur of humiliation and heartbreak. Derek and Melissa became the couple everyone talked about, the perfect match, the merger of two prominent families. Meanwhile, I became the cautionary tale, the girl who'd tried to climb above her station. His friends, who'd barely tolerated me when we were together, now acted like I didn't exist. When I'd run into them at the grocery store or the gym, they'd look through me like I was made of glass. My only real comfort during those dark months was my grandmother's memory. Grandma Rose had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. She'd been a secretary at a law firm for 40 years, living paycheck to paycheck, but somehow always making sure I had everything I needed. "Never let them make you feel small, Emma," she'd tell me, her weathered hands holding mine. "You come from stronger stock than any of those people will ever know. She'd passed away 3 years ago, leaving me completely alone in the world. Her funeral had been small, just me, a few of her elderly friends from the senior center, and Mr. Jameson, the lawyer she'd worked for during her last decade at the firm. He'd seemed oddly emotional for an employer, gripping my hand tightly and telling me to call him if I ever needed anything. I never did call him. Pride, maybe, or just the exhaustion that comes from constantly trying to prove you're worthy of basic respect. The charity gala at Rosewood Country Club was something I'd been dreading for weeks. It was a fundraiser for the city's art program, and Preston and Associates had donated design work for the event materials. Janet had volunteered me to attend and represent the company. Unpaid overtime, of course, but mandatory if I wanted to keep my job. I'd tried to make myself presentable. My black dress was from Target, but it was clean and well-fitted. I'd watched YouTube tutorials to do my makeup and hair. Looking in the mirror before I left my studio apartment, I'd almost felt pretty, almost felt like I belonged. That feeling lasted exactly until I pulled into the country club parking lot and saw the parade of luxury. Cars, Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, and of course Derek's new Porsche, a gift from his father for closing some major business deal. My Honda looked like a servant among royalty, and I parked it in the farthest corner, hoping to avoid attention. But Derek had eagle eyes for opportunities to assert his superiority. He was standing by the entrance with Melissa and several of their friends when he spotted me walking across the parking lot. The predatory smile that spread across his face made my stomach drop. "Emma," he called out, his voice carrying that false surprise that meant he'd been waiting for this moment. "Is that you? I didn't know you were coming to this." I forced myself to keep walking, to maintain some dignity. "My company is one of the sponsors," I said quietly. "Oh, right. You still work at that little design place," Melissa chimed in, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How nice that they let you come to events like this." That's when Derek's eyes found my car, still visible in the corner of the lot, and the laughter started. That cruel, cutting laughter that made everyone turn to look. "Please tell me that's not your car," he said between gasps of mock disbelief. "The one with the duct tape? Oh my God, Emma, that's just sad. I mean, I knew things were tight for you, but this is next level." More people had gathered now, drawn by the spectacle. I recognized several faces, people who'd once pretended to be friendly when I was Derek's girlfriend, now watching my humiliation with barely concealed glee. "It runs," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "That's all that matters." "Does it, though?" Derek pressed on, intoxicated by his audience. "I mean, the check engine light has been on since we dated. What's it been, 2 years, 3? Can you even afford to fix it? Or are you just hoping it holds together with prayer and duct tape?" Melissa laughed, a tinkling sound that made others join in. "Derek, be nice," she said in a way that meant the opposite. "Not everyone can afford proper transportation. I'm sure Emma does her best with what she has." "Which isn't much," someone muttered, causing another wave of snickers. I stood there, frozen, my face burning with shame. Every instinct told me to run, to get in my beat-up car and drive away, but my legs wouldn't move. The weight of their judgment, their mockery, their complete dismissal of me as a human being, it was crushing. That's when I heard it. The low rumble of a powerful engine growing louder as it approached. Everyone turned toward the sound, and I saw the truck, a specialized auto transport with precision luxury delivery written on the side. It pulled into the country club's circular drive, and the driver got out, clipboard in hand. "I'm looking for Emma Chen," he called out. My heart stopped. Chen was my grandmother's maiden name, the one I'd started using professionally after the breakup to distance myself from the humiliation. But how did this driver know to find me here? I'm Emma Chen," I said, stepping forward on shaky legs. The driver smiled. "Perfect timing. I have your delivery. If you could just sign here?" Derek laughed again, but it sounded forced now. "What, did you order an Uber in advance? That's actually smart, considering your car situation." But the driver was already lowering the truck's ramp, and as the car rolled into view, the laughter died instantly. It was a Lamborghini Huracan Evo, pristine white with black accents, the kind of car that looked like it was moving even when it stood still. The evening sun caught its curves, making it seem to glow. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered. The driver checked his clipboard. "Emma Chen, delivery address listed as Rosewood Country Club for this evening. Special instructions from the estate of Rose Chen to ensure delivery at exactly 7:45 p.m. He glanced at his watch. Right on time. My grandmother's name. My grandmother who'd been a secretary. My grandmother who'd lived in a one-bedroom apartment and clipped coupons. None of this made sense. "There's also this," the driver said, handing me an envelope with my name written in official-looking script. "The attorney said you'd want to read it immediately." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Mr. Jameson's careful handwriting. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, then the first phase of your grandmother's plan has been executed. Rose Chen was far more than she appeared, and now it's time for you to learn the truth. Your grandmother wasn't just a secretary. She was one of the most brilliant investment minds of her generation, working in secret to build a fortune that would stagger you. She chose to live simply, to raise you without the burden of wealth, to ensure you grew up with values, not entitlement. The Lamborghini is just the beginning, a statement piece, she called it, for a moment when you would need to show the world who you really are. There is much more waiting for you. Properties, investments, accounts. But she wanted this reveal to happen exactly as it has, at a moment when those who dismissed you would be forced to see the truth. Your grandmother saw everything, Emma. She knew about Derek, about the way his family treated you, about your struggles. She could have intervened at any time, but she wanted you to learn strength first, to understand what it meant to stand on your own feet before you learned to soar. Come to my office tomorrow morning. There's so much more to show you. With deepest respect, Robert Jameson. The letter slipped from my numb fingers, floating to the ground. Around me, the silence was deafening. Derek's mouth hung open, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like fear. Melissa had taken several steps back, her perfectly manicured hand pressed to her chest. "This is a joke," Derek finally managed. "This has to be some kind of prank." The delivery driver, oblivious to the drama, held out the key fob. "No joke, sir. This is a $300,000 vehicle, custom ordered 18 months ago with specific modifications. Mrs. Chen was very particular about the specifications." 18 months ago, when Derek and I were still together, when his mother was making snide comments about my apartment, when I was saving every penny to try to fit into their world. My grandmother had been planning this all along. I took the key fob, its weight substantial in my palm. The Lamborghini chirped softly as I pressed the unlock button, its scissor doors rising like wings. The interior was black leather with white stitching, and there, embroidered on the headrests, were the initials RC and EC, Rose Chen and Emma Chen. "Emma, wait," Derek said, stepping forward. His tone had completely changed, the mockery replaced with something desperate. "I had no idea. I mean, why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who had made me feel worthless, who had cheated on me, who had just moments ago been leading a chorus of mockery about my beat-up car. "I didn't know," I said simply. "And even if I had, would it have mattered? Would you have treated me with respect if you'd known about the money, or would you have just used me differently?" "That's not fair," he protested. "We had something real." "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "What we had was you tolerating me as long as I made you feel superior. The moment you found someone you thought was more valuable, you discarded me like trash." Melissa tugged on his arm. "Derek, let's go inside." But he shrugged her off, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Emma, please, we could talk about this. I know I hurt you, but nothing," I interrupted. "Do you want to know the really funny part? If you had just been kind, If you had treated me like a human being worthy of basic respect, this moment would be completely different. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to make sure everyone knew how beneath you I was. I walked to my Honda then, my beat-up, duct-taped Honda that had gotten me through everything. I patted its hood gently. "Thank you," I whispered to it. "You got me here." Then I walked back to the Lamborghini, aware that everyone was watching, that several people had their phones out recording. Good. Let them record this. "You know what the difference is between us, Derek?" I said as I slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I know what it's like to have nothing and still maintain my dignity. You've never had nothing, and yet you still have no dignity at all." I closed the door, the scissor door that looked like something from a dream, and drove away, leaving Derek, Melissa, and the entire crowd standing in stunned silence. In my rearview mirror, I saw him kick the tire of his Porsche, his face contorted with rage. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about my grandmother, about all those years she'd lived so simply, worked so hard, loved me so fiercely. She'd given me something more valuable than money. She'd given me the chance to know who I really was before I learned what I really had. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Jameson's office building at exactly 9 a.m. It wasn't the small, shabby law office I'd expected from my memories of the funeral. This was a gleaming tower in the financial district, with Jameson, Chen and Associates etched in gold letters in the marble lobby. Chen, my grandmother's name, was part of the firm. Mr. Jameson met me personally in the lobby, looking nothing like the elderly lawyer I remembered. He seemed younger, more vital, his eyes sharp with intelligence and something else, anticipation. "Emma," he said, taking my hands in both of his, "I've been waiting for this day for 3 years. Your grandmother made me promise to execute her plan exactly as she specified. She was extraordinary." He led me to a private elevator that required a special key. "Your grandmother wasn't just my employee," he said as we rose toward the top floor. "She was my partner, my mentor, and the brilliant mind behind some of the most successful investment strategies of the last 40 years. The elevator opened into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But it was the walls that took my breath away. They were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents, and in every single one, there was my grandmother. Rose Chen, receiving the Shadow Investor Award for anonymous contributions to market stability, Mr. Jameson read from one framed article. Rose Chen, the secretary who secretly saved global tech from bankruptcy. Rose Chen, the woman behind the Phoenix Fund that turned $1,000 into $1 billion. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I don't understand. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment. She shopped at discount stores. She darned her own socks. Mr. Jameson smiled. She chose to live that way. She believed that wealth without wisdom was dangerous, that privilege without perspective was poison. She wanted you to understand struggle before you understood success. He pulled out a thick folder and placed it in front of me. "Your inheritance, Emma. Not just money, though there's plenty of that, about $2.8 billion, to be precise." I couldn't breathe. Billion, with a B. "But more than that," he continued, "she's left you a legacy. Companies she invested in that are now worth fortunes. Real estate in 7 countries. Art collections in private storage. And this building, she owned it. She owned many buildings, actually, all under various trusts and shell companies." "Why?" I whispered. "Why keep it secret? Why let me struggle?" Mr. Jameson pulled out another envelope, this one marked, "To be opened only when Emma asks why." Inside was a letter in my grandmother's careful handwriting. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, you're probably angry with me. Good. Feel that anger, process it, and then let it go. I need you to understand why I did what I did. When your parents died, I inherited not just you, but also their life insurance, a substantial sum. I could have used it to give us a comfortable life. Instead, I invested it, grew it, multiplied it 1,000-fold. But I also watched what inherited wealth did to people. I saw children grow up entitled, purposeless, cruel. I saw them become like Derek Morrison and his family, people who mistake their bank accounts for their worth. I wanted more for you. I wanted you to know what it meant to work for minimum wage, to worry about rent, to have your card declined at the grocery store. Not because I was cruel, but because I wanted you to have empathy. I wanted you to understand that the person serving your coffee, cleaning your office, or struggling with their bills was a full human being deserving of dignity. You dated Derek, and I let you, even though I knew exactly who he was. His father's restaurants? I own the buildings they're in. I could have destroyed them with a phone call. But you needed to learn for yourself the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can do for them. Now you know struggle. Now you know heartbreak. Now you know what it feels like to be dismissed and diminished. And now, my darling girl, you're ready for power. Because you'll use it differently than they would. You'll use it with wisdom, with kindness, with the understanding that money is just a tool, not a measure of human worth. The Lamborghini was my little joke. Forgive an old woman her dramatics. I knew there would come a moment when those who hurt you would need to see the truth in a way they couldn't deny or dismiss. I hope it was everything I imagined. But the cars, the houses, the money, that's not your real inheritance. Your real inheritance is the knowledge that you are enough with or without any of it. You were enough when you drove that beat-up Honda. You were enough when Derek's mother looked down on you. You were enough when you cried yourself to sleep, wondering why you couldn't be what they wanted. You were always enough. The money just makes it easier for the world to see what I always knew. Use this wealth wisely, Emma. Help those who struggle like you struggled. Invest in dreams, not just portfolios. And never, ever let it change the beautiful heart that made you cry when you saw homeless people, that made you share your lunch with coworkers who forgot theirs, that made you kind even when the world was cruel. I love you beyond words, beyond death, beyond time. Your grandmother, Rose Chen P.S. Derek's father has been trying to buy the buildings his restaurants are in for years. The offers are in the blue folder. What you do with them is up to you, but I'd suggest making him sweat a little. He once made a pass at me at a business function, thinking I was just a secretary. I've been charging him below market rent ever since, just enough to keep him comfortable but dependent. You might want to consider current market rates. I laughed through my tears. Of course she'd planned even that. My grandmother, the secret puppet master, pulling strings I never even knew existed. Mr. Jameson gave me time to compose myself, then walked me through the basics of the estate. The numbers were staggering. She owned pieces of companies I used every day. She had been an early investor in technologies that shaped the modern world. She had real estate in cities I'd only dreamed of visiting. "There's one more thing," he said, leading me to another room. This one was smaller, more intimate, with a desk and computer setup. "Your grandmother's private office. She worked here after her official retirement, managing everything. She wanted you to have it when you were ready." On the desk was a photo I'd never seen before, my grandmother as a young woman, standing next to a man I didn't recognize in front of the New York Stock Exchange. "That's your grandfather," Mr. Jameson said softly. "Chen Enterprises founder. He died before you were born, but together they built an empire. Your grandmother just chose to keep it in the shadows after he passed." I spent the rest of the day going through documents, each revelation more incredible than the last. My grandmother hadn't just been wealthy. She'd been one of the most successful shadow investors in history, influencing markets and industries while maintaining the facade of a simple secretary. As the sun set over the city, I stood at the window, looking down at the streets below. Somewhere down there, Derek was probably still fuming about last night. His family was probably having emergency meetings about the girl they'd dismissed, who turned out to be worth more than all of them combined. My phone had been buzzing all day with messages. The video of the Lamborghini delivery had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of comments. People who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly reaching out. Janet from work had sent 17 messages, each more frantically friendly than the last. I ignored them all except one, a text from Maria, the cleaning lady at my office who always smiled and asked about my day. "Saw the video," she'd written. "Good for you, honey. You deserve it." She was the only one I responded to. "Thank you. Coffee tomorrow?" My treat. That evening, I drove the Lamborghini back to my studio apartment. It looked absurd parked next to the building's dumpster. This machine worth more than most people's houses, sitting outside my $800 a month rental. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed time to process, to understand what all of this meant. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was sitting on the stoop smoking her evening cigarette. She'd been one of the few people who'd been kind to me after the breakup, sometimes leaving cookies at my door when she heard me crying through the thin walls. "That's some car," she said, eyeing the Lamborghini. "It was my grandmother's," I said, which was true enough. She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother must have been something special." "She was," I said, and for the first time I truly understood just how special. Over the next few weeks, my life became a surreal blend of my old existence and my new reality. I still went to work at Preston and Associates, much to everyone's confusion. Janet couldn't figure out how to treat me. Was I still her subordinate, or was I now someone she needed to impress? The cognitive dissonance was clearly killing her. "Why are you still here?" she finally asked one day, her frustration evident. "You could buy this entire company with your pocket change." "Because I have a project to finish," I said simply, and I did. The Children's Hospital charity campaign I'd been working on for months. It was my design, my vision, and I wanted to see it through. Derek, meanwhile, had been leaving increasingly desperate messages. First came the apologies, then the justifications, then the anger, then back to apologies. His final voicemail was the most telling. "Emma, please, my father's freaking out. Something about the buildings and rent increases. Can we just talk? I know I messed up, but this is affecting my whole family." I didn't respond, but I did meet with his father. Richard Morrison was a man who'd built his identity around being powerful, successful, untouchable. Sitting across from me in Mr. Jameson's conference room, he looked smaller than I remembered. "Miss Chen," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding about the rent situation." "No misunderstanding," I said calmly. "Your lease agreements are clear. Rent can be adjusted to market rates with 90 days' notice. You've been paying approximately 40% below market for the past 5 years. His face flushed. "Your grandmother and I had an understanding." "Did you?" I pulled out a file Mr. Jameson had prepared for me. "Because according to these records, my grandmother documented every interaction with you, including the Christmas party of 2018, where you cornered her by the copy machine and suggested she could earn a lease renewal. She was 73 years old, Mr. Morrison." The color drained from his face. "That was... I had been drinking. It was a misunderstanding." "Like your son misunderstood that I was a human being worthy of basic respect?" I let that hang in the air for a moment. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll pay market rate going forward. You'll also pay the difference for the past 5 years as a lump sum within 30 days. Consider it a discount on what a sexual harassment lawsuit would have cost you." "That's extortion." "No," I said, standing to leave. "Extortion would be releasing the security footage my grandmother preserved. This is business. Your son taught me that everything is transactional, remember? He paid, of course. What choice did he have? The money went directly to a fund I established for women escaping abusive relationships. My grandmother would have appreciated the irony. The viral video of the Lamborghini delivery had an unexpected consequence. Messages poured in from people sharing their own stories of being dismissed, belittled, and underestimated. Single mothers working 3 jobs while their ex-husbands lived in luxury. Students mocked for their thrift store clothes while working to pay their own tuition. Employees passed over for promotions because they didn't golf with the right people. Their stories broke my heart and fired my determination. My grandmother had given me wealth, but more importantly, she'd given me the perspective to use it properly. I established the Rose Chen Foundation with a simple mission: to support those who were working hard but being held back by circumstances beyond their control. Not handouts, but hand-ups. Scholarships for first-generation college students. Microloans for small businesses in underserved communities. Legal aid for workers facing discrimination. The Foundation's first major initiative was purchasing a building in the city's arts district and converting it into affordable live workspaces for artists. The second was establishing a fund for Preston and Associates employees, not the executives, but the assistants, the cleaning staff, the security guards, to pursue education or start their own businesses. Janet nearly choked when I announced it at the company meeting. "Why would you do this?" she asked privately afterward. "Because I can," I said simply, "and because they deserve it." Maria, the cleaning lady, was the first to apply. She'd always dreamed of opening a bakery, but never had the capital. 6 months later, Maria's sweet dreams opened 3 blocks from the office. I was her first customer, and her smile when she served me coffee and the pastry she'd named Emma's encouragement was worth more than any luxury car. Derek showed up at the bakery one day while I was there. He looked different, diminished somehow, like someone had let the air out of him. Melissa had left him, apparently, the moment his family's financial troubles became apparent. "Emma," he said, approaching my table cautiously. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from me. Maria shot him a look that could have curdled milk but said nothing. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything," he began. "Then don't," I said, not unkindly but firmly. I need you to know that I'm sorry, really sorry, not because of the money, okay, not just because of the money, but because I see now what I did to you, how I made you feel. It was cruel." "Yes," I agreed. "It was. I loved you," he said, quietly. I didn't know how to love you without trying to change you. I thought I was helping, making you better." "Better," I repeated, tasting the word. "You mean more like you, more like your world." He nodded miserably. "I was an idiot." "You were a product of your environment," I said, "raised to believe that wealth equals worth, that poverty is a character flaw, that people like me existed to make people like you feel superior." "Is there any chance—" "No," I cut him off. "Derek, I don't hate you. I actually pity you. You're 27 years old and you've never had to develop a personality beyond your bank account. You've never had to be interesting or kind or creative because money opened every door. Now that those doors are closing, you don't know who you are." He stared at his hands. "So, what do I do?" "Figure it out," I said, standing to leave. "Maybe try working a real job, one where you can't coast on your last name. Learn what it's like to be nobody special and find out if you can become someone worth knowing without the props." I left him there, sitting alone in Maria's bakery, surrounded by the warmth and success of someone who'd built something real with her own hands. A year passed. The foundation grew. The viral video faded from memory, replaced by newer sensations. I moved out of my studio apartment, not into a mansion, but into a comfortable townhouse in a middle-class neighborhood. I kept the Honda parked right next to the Lamborghini in my garage, a reminder of where I'd been. I still worked, not at Preston and Associates, but as the director of the foundation. It wasn't about the money. I had more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was about the purpose, the daily reminder that wealth without action was just hoarded paper. Mr. Jameson became not just my attorney, but my mentor, teaching me what my grandmother hadn't had time to. How to read markets, understand investments, spot opportunities not just for profit, but for impact. He showed me letters my grandmother had written over the years, planning for this moment, preparing for my education in wealth and responsibility. She played the long game, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed the Foundation's latest initiatives. Every move calculated decades in advance. Even your relationship with Derek, she knew it would happen. She knew his type would be drawn to you, and that you'd need to experience that particular form of cruelty to understand how to wield power responsibly. She could have warned me, I said, though without bitterness. Would you have listened? Or would you have thought she was being overprotective, old-fashioned? Sometimes wisdom can't be taught, only learned. He was right, of course. My grandmother usually was. The second anniversary of the Lamborghini delivery found me at a very different charity gala. This one I'd organized, bringing together not just the wealthy, but the workers, the dreamers, the builders. Maria was there with her husband, both in their best clothes, mingling with CEOs and artists alike. Several scholarship recipients shared their stories, their voices strong and proud. Derek was there too, surprisingly. He'd taken my advice, apparently. He was working as a line cook in a restaurant, not one of his father's, and had used his experience to start a program teaching cooking skills to formerly homeless individuals. He looked tired, but somehow more substantial, like he'd finally developed a third dimension. "Thank you," he said when our paths crossed near the dessert table, "for the wake-up call." "Thank yourself," I replied. "You're the one who did the work." Victoria Morrison was notably absent, but Richard was there, older-looking and humbler. He'd sold most of his restaurants, keeping only the original one, and had partnered with a nonprofit to provide free meals to food-insecure families. Forced generosity, perhaps, but generosity nonetheless. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said to me, and for once I believed he meant it. As the evening wound down, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I'd stood in a country club parking lot, humiliated and small, wishing I could disappear. Now I stood here, powerful beyond my wildest dreams, but more importantly, purposeful beyond my grandmother's careful planning. My phone buzzed with a message from one of our scholarship recipients. "Got into medical school. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." That, I thought, was the real inheritance my grandmother had left me. Not the money or the cars or the buildings, but the understanding that true wealth was measured in the lives you lifted, the dreams you enabled, the dignity you restored. The Lamborghini still sat in my garage, used occasionally for foundation events where a statement needed to be made. But more often I drove the Honda, now lovingly restored, but still bearing a few battle scars. It reminded me of the journey, of the struggle, of the woman my grandmother had helped me become through absence as much as presence. Late that night, I visited my grandmother's grave, something I did every month. I brought her flowers, carnations from the grocery store, not roses from the expensive florist. She would have appreciated the practicality. "I understand now," I told her headstone, "all of it. The struggle, the secrets, the perfect timing of everything. You didn't just leave me money. You left me a masterclass in human nature, in power, in purpose." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. "Never let them make you feel small, Emma." "I won't," I promised. "But more importantly, I'll make sure others never feel small either." As I walked back to my car, the Honda, that night, I thought about the people who'd laughed at me in that parking lot. Most of them had reached out over the past 2 years, suddenly interested in rekindling friendships that had never existed. I'd ignored them all, not out of spite, but out of clarity. They hadn't changed, only their perception of my value had. But there were others, people who'd been kind when I had nothing, who remained in my life. Mrs. Patterson, who still lived in the same building and still smoked on the stoop, now cancer-free thanks to treatment the foundation had helped fund. Maria, whose bakery had expanded to 3 locations, all employing women escaping difficult circumstances. The security guard at my old office, who'd always held the door with a genuine smile, now running his own security firm with a small business loan from the foundation. These were my people. These were the ones who understood that wealth wasn't about what you had, but about what you did with it. The foundation's work continued to expand. We established a program for young women in situations similar to what mine had been, working hard but held back by circumstances, dating men who diminished them, struggling to find their worth in a world that measured everything in dollars. We called it the Rose Garden, and it provided not just financial support, but mentoring, therapy, and community. One young woman, Sarah, reminded me particularly of myself. She worked 2 jobs while attending community college, drove a car held together with hope and duct tape, and had recently ended a relationship with someone who'd made her feel worthless for not coming from money. "How do you get past it?" she asked me during one of our mentoring sessions. "The voice in your head that says they're right, that you're not enough?" I thought about my grandmother's letter, about Derek's laughter, about the moment the Lamborghini had rolled off that truck. "You realize that enough isn't something anyone else gets to decide for you," I told her. "Your worth isn't determined by your bank account or your car or whether someone from a good family deems you acceptable. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, and absolute. The money, the success, the validation, that's all just noise. You were enough before any of it, and you'll be enough regardless of what comes next." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and I saw myself 2 years ago, desperate for someone to tell me I mattered. "Also," I added with a smile, "it doesn't hurt to have a really dramatic moment where everyone who doubted you has to eat their words. That's just human nature." She laughed, and I made a mental note to check in with Mr. Jameson about the trust fund my grandmother had apparently set up for future Emma situations. Because of course she had. My grandmother had thought of everything. The 3rd anniversary of the Lamborghini delivery arrived with unexpected news. Mr. Jameson called me into his office, his expression uncharacteristically emotional. "There's one last piece of your grandmother's plan," he said, handing me an envelope marked, "To be opened 3 years after the revelation." Inside was another letter in my grandmother's handwriting. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then 3 years have passed since you learned the truth. I hope you've used the time wisely, and knowing you, I'm certain you have. There's one last secret to share. The money, the investments, the empire I built, it was never really mine. It was always yours, waiting for you to be ready. Every decision I made, every investment, every calculated risk was with you in mind. You were my greatest investment, my most important project, my legacy. But here's what I need you to understand. The fortune I left you is both a gift and a test. It will attract people who want to use you, just as poverty attracted those who wanted to dismiss you. Neither group sees you for who you really are. Your challenge is to find the people who would value you the same, whether you had billions or nothing. You've already started to find them, I'm sure. Hold on to those people. They're worth more than all the money in all the accounts." One final thing. In the vault at the bank, there's a safety deposit box, number 1892. Inside, you'll find something that belonged to your mother. She would have wanted you to have it when you were ready to understand its value. Remember, my darling, money is just a tool. Love is the only real currency. All my love, Grandma Rose. The safety deposit box contained a simple gold locket, tarnished with age. Inside were 2 pictures, one of my parents on their wedding day, the other of me as a baby with my grandmother. On the back was engraved, "True wealth is measured in love given and received." I wore that locket to the next foundation gala, where it meant more to me than any designer jewelry ever could. Derek was there again, this time with a woman who worked at the homeless shelter where he volunteered. She drove a beat-up Toyota and laughed with genuine warmth. He seemed happy, really happy, for the first time since I'd known him. "You look good," I told him, meaning it. "I feel good," he replied. "Poor, but good. Turns out that's possible. Who knew?" We both laughed, and for the first time, there was no awkwardness between us. We'd both learned our lessons, both grown into better versions of ourselves. The cruelty and humiliation of that night in the country club parking lot had led to transformation for both of us. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing where I'd stood a year before, looking out over the city. But this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside me, wearing a dress she'd bought with her first paycheck from her new job at a design firm, a position she'd gotten entirely on her own merit, though the foundation had helped with interview coaching. "I got into the art program," she said quietly, "full scholarship to the university." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "I wanted to thank you," she continued. "Not for the money or the programs, but for showing me that it's possible, that someone like us can make it without losing ourselves." "Someone like us," I repeated, smiling. "I like that." As the city lights twinkled below, I thought about my grandmother, about the long game she'd played, about the lessons she'd embedded in every carefully planned moment of my journey. She'd given me wealth, yes, but more importantly, she'd given me the wisdom to use it well and the strength to stand tall regardless of what I had or didn't have. The Lamborghini still made appearances when necessary, a reminder that sometimes you need to make a statement, to force the world to see you differently. But the real power wasn't in the car or the money or the buildings with my name on them. It was in knowing that I was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough, regardless of what I drove or where I lived or who deemed me worthy of their attention. 5 years have passed since that night at the country club. The video of the Lamborghini delivery still circulates occasionally, usually with some inspirational caption about karma or justice. But for me, it represents something different. The moment I stopped letting others define my worth. The foundation has helped thousands of people now, each with their own story of being dismissed, diminished, or denied opportunities because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of valuable. We've funded businesses, education, medical treatments, and fresh starts. But more than that, we've funded dignity, self-worth, and the radical idea that every person deserves respect regardless of their bank account. Derek's father's restaurants are thriving again, though under new management and with a very different philosophy. They employ formerly incarcerated individuals, pay living wages, and donate a percentage of profits to food security programs. Richard Morrison sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message: "Thank you for the lesson." Derek himself is getting married next month. He sent me an invitation, not expecting me to attend, but wanting me to know. His fiancée included a note: "Thank you for breaking him down so he could build himself back up properly. He's a good man now, and that's partly because of what you taught him. I won't attend the wedding, but I sent a gift, a donation to their chosen charity in their names. Some chapters are better left closed, even when they end well. The beat-up Honda finally gave out last year, the engine seizing on the highway in a dramatic cloud of smoke. I had it towed home and kept it, transformed into a planter in the foundation's garden. It seems fitting, something that carried me through my hardest times now helping new life grow. I still have the Lamborghini, though it spends most of its time under a cover in the garage. Occasionally, when I need to remember the moment everything changed, I take it out for a drive. It still turns heads, still makes people stare, but now I understand that their reaction says more about them than about me. Mr. Jameson is retiring next year, but not before helping me establish the next phase of the foundation's work. A network of companies committed to hiring based on potential rather than pedigree, to promoting based on merit rather than connections, to creating opportunities for those who've been overlooked or underestimated. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he tells me regularly. "She planned all of this, didn't she?" I asked him recently. "Every bit of it. She knew exactly how it would unfold." He smiled. "She had contingencies for contingencies. But yes, this was always the hoped-for outcome. You using your experience and resources to change how the world works, one person at a time." Last week, I received an unexpected message. It was from Melissa, Derek's ex-girlfriend, the one who'd laughed at my car that night. She'd fallen on hard times, her family's fortune lost to bad investments, her engagement to a wealthy heir broken off when the money disappeared. "I know I have no right to contact you," she wrote, "but I'm desperate. I've applied everywhere, but without connections, without the right clothes, without a decent car, no one will hire me. I don't know what to do." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The woman who'd mocked my poverty was now experiencing it herself, learning what it felt like to be dismissed based on circumstances rather than character. I could have ignored her message. I could have sent back a cruel response, reminding her of her own words that night. I could have made her grovel, but that would have made me no better than she'd been. Instead, I forwarded her information to the Rose Garden program with a note. "Treat her like any other applicant. If she qualifies, help her. Everyone deserves a second chance to become a better person." She was accepted into the program. I've kept my distance, letting other mentors work with her, but I've watched her progress. The humility is new, hard-won, and possibly temporary. But she's trying, and that's more than many do. My grandmother's grave has become something of a pilgrimage site for me. I visit not just monthly now, but whenever I need guidance, whenever I need to remember the lessons she embedded in my journey. The headstone is simple, just her name and dates, nothing to indicate the empire she built or the legacy she left. "You did it, Grandma," I tell her on each visit. "You created something that will outlast us both. Not the money, that's just numbers and accounts, but the change, the shifted perspectives, the lives lifted, that's eternal." Sometimes I imagine her response, always in that practical, no-nonsense voice. "Stop talking to a headstone and go help someone, Emma. The dead don't need your words. The living need your actions." She's right, of course. She always was. As I write this, sitting in the office that was once hers, looking out at a city full of people struggling and striving and surviving, I think about the night that started it all. Derek laughing at my beat-up car, the crowd joining in, me standing there wishing I could disappear. If I could go back, would I change it? Would I want to have known about the money earlier, to have avoided that humiliation? No, because that moment, that horrible, crushing moment, was the catalyst for everything that followed. Not just the Lamborghini delivery, but the understanding it brought. The realization that my worth had nothing to do with what I drove or what others thought of me. The knowledge that true power comes not from wealth, but from wisdom, not from privilege, but from purpose. My grandmother knew that. She knew that inherited wealth without inherited wisdom was a curse, not a blessing. So she gave me the wisdom first, disguised as struggle, wrapped in hardship, delivered through humiliation. Only when I'd learned those lessons was I ready for the wealth. The phone rings. It's Sarah, calling to tell me she's been accepted into a prestigious artist residency program. "I wanted you to be the first to know," she says, her voice bright with joy. "None of this would have been possible without you." "It was always possible," I correct her gently. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." After we hang up, I walk to the window again, looking down at the parking lot where my Lamborghini sits next to a dozen ordinary cars belonging to Foundation employees. The contrast that once would have seemed important now seems irrelevant. They're all just vehicles, tools to get from one place to another. The real journey, the one from self-doubt to self-worth, from dismissed to dignified, from broken to built, that's the one that matters. And that journey doesn't require a luxury car or a billion-dollar inheritance. It just requires the courage to know your worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks. It requires the wisdom to understand that money amplifies who you are. It doesn't change who you are. And it requires the compassion to lift others as you rise, to use whatever privileges you have, earned or inherited, to create opportunities for those still struggling. My grandmother understood all of this. She embedded these lessons in every aspect of my journey, from the struggle to the revelation to the responsibility that followed. She played a long game that spanned decades, all to ensure that when wealth came to me, I'd be ready not just to receive it, but to use it wisely. The Lamborghini in the parking lot? That was never really about the car. It was about the moment when those who dismissed me had to see me differently. But more importantly, it was about the moment I stopped needing their validation. Because that's the real secret my grandmother knew. The only opinion about your worth that matters is your own. Everything else, the money, the cars, the respect of others, is just noise. I was enough when I drove the beat-up Honda. I was enough when Derek laughed at me. I was enough when I could barely make rent. I was enough before I knew about the billions, and I would be enough if it all disappeared tomorrow. That's the inheritance that really matters. Not the money my grandmother left me, but the unshakable knowledge of my own worth she made sure I'd find. The Lamborghini was just the exclamation point on a lesson years in the making, that true wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in knowing who you are, and I know exactly who I am. I'm Emma Chen, granddaughter of Rose Chen, heir to an empire built in shadows and revealed in light. But more than that, I'm someone who knows what it's like to be dismissed and diminished, who understands struggle and survival, who's learned that kindness matters more than cash and dignity more than dollars. The delivery of that Lamborghini didn't change my life because it made me rich. I was already rich. I just didn't know it yet. It changed my life because it marked the moment I stopped letting others define my value. And that moment of recognition, of refusing to be made small, of standing in your worth regardless of what you drive or where you live or who deems you acceptable, that's the real luxury. That's the gift my grandmother gave me, wrapped in struggle, tied with hardship, and delivered at exactly the right moment. The Lamborghini? That was just the bow on top.